Welcome to Lair, the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, I have a very special guest, metal and hard rock author, journalist, and critic Martin Popoff. Martin has published over 90 books and counting, and has unofficially written more record reviews than anyone in the history of music. In addition to his writings, Martin has a podcast called History in 5 Songs, as well as a YouTube show entitled The Contrarians, where Martin and his co-hosts discuss dark horse albums from some of their favorite bands. Martin's immense knowledge of all things rock and metal also makes him an in-demand guest, often appearing on Banger TV, Sea of Tranquility, and many other channels. Martin will be sharing with us his story and headbanging journey across the ever-changing landscape of music journalism. On a personal note, Martin is my favorite rock author, and I currently own many of his books, some which you can see behind me. My first Martin Popoff book was the original 1997 The Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal, which, although my copy is showing some serious signs of wear and tear, it will always hold a special place on my bookshelf. Martin, thank you for joining me here at the Lair.
Hey, man, thanks very much. A nice introduction. Wow, I'm flattered. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I will be leaving links below in the description for Martin's various projects, for his website, where you can go and purchase his books and get more information on his books and on Martin. So, okay, Martin, you've told the story of our favorite bands to us for years now. Now it's time to hear your story. Let's go back. Who was the band? What was the album or song that ignited the flame and got you into rock and roll?
Wow. Well, actually, it doesn't start very heavy metal, because I remember vaguely through the film of time, the Columbia Record House situation. So I grew up in a small town, Trail, BC, and I remember being allowed to pick a couple of things to keep. You know how it was negative option billing, right? They'd send you all this stuff, you had to send it back. And I remember the first things were the likes of it was either Creedence Clearwater Revival Pendulum or Cosmos Factory. And then the double live Three Dog Night album, and then Steppenwolf Gold. So there was inklings of heaviness in there. Some of these guys looked heavy, and Steppenwolf could be a little heavy here and there or whatever. But after that, as soon as I heard heavy, guitar through a distortion pedal, that was it. I mean, everything else was sort of put aside, and it was like being very militant heavy metal for all of the 70s, basically. So that Columbia Record House thing might have been 69, 70. I would have been 6, 7 years old. But then I would say at around 9 years old, it was the likes of Nazareth Razamanaz. I believe Led Zeppelin 4 was one of the first things I ever heard. Volume 4 was one of the first things I ever bought, or Vol 4, Vol no period, numeral 4, right, to keep it right. Probably Machine Head was heard pretty soon thereafter. And then I remember, I would say the first band that I grew up with as a completely woke, obsessive metalhead would have been Kiss. So I would have bought that as a new release in 74. But yeah, Rush, BTO, definitely super early. So that would have been around 9 years old. So BTO, I think BTO 2 was the first one, and then BTO 1. So yeah, those are the ones that would have started it off.
Awesome. Where were you hearing music from in those early days? Did you have older siblings, friends that were turning you on to stuff? Radio, all of the above?
Yeah, so it would have been the older brother of my partner in crime, Forrest Toop, who was as obsessive as I was. We bought all of this stuff together all through elementary school and high school. Like, we were the two guys that were completely nuts about all this stuff. So his older brother, who also played guitar, so he was buying some of the first things that we ever heard. I remember Mott the Hoople Live was something that came back on one of those first trips to Spokane, Washington, from where we were. Older cousins, a couple of older cousins. And then, definitely by 1975 at 12 years old, I had a subscription to Circus, and we would go downtown. We would buy Hit Parader and Cream as well. So that's basically it. Those are the only sources at that point.
Well, it's interesting because back then, obviously, way before the internet, you had limited resources. So a lot of times it was word of mouth. Maybe
Yeah,
somebody had an older brother who you could borrow his record when he wasn't looking and stuff like that. So it was
yeah.
sort of an exciting time for that. I've heard you say in your books something along the lines of that you never forget the albums that you were the album that you were listening to when you cracked your first beer or you had your first kiss. So, what are those albums for you that take you back to those early years? Do you have special memories of hanging with your buds, discovering new music? You hear that album today, and it takes you right back to sort of that special time.
Yeah, wow. So here's an odd one. So I would say first girlfriend, I would have been about 7 years old, and her parents had Beatles White Album. So Beatles White Album, we played to death in their really cool modular kind of Swedish designed house. They had a kind of a really cool hippie, cool designed house in our neighborhood. So Beatles White Album, and really, I never became a massive Beatles fan, but I always loved the White Album. First big concert I ever went to was Ted Nugent, Rex, and Bebop Deluxe. So going on that trip and picking up the first Rex album and Free for All on that trip to Spokane, Washington. That was pretty cool. I remember a funny story about Kiss Alive 2. No, sorry, Kiss Alive 1. So 1975. Forrest and I had gone to the dump, and rummaged around the city dump. And on this particular day, right at the front entrance, there was this box of pristine April Wine Live 1974 posters, like a big block of paper, like untouched, right? And it was that album cover with the really evil looking purple and black of that April Wine Live album. And we had one of these dances coming up that we would do in our basement or somebody else's basement. And we took all those posters and run a ring around all four walls, top to bottom, cutting out for the light switches and the power receptacles all the way around with this April Wine poster. I wish we had a poster picture of it, right? I still have one of the poster, but hundreds and hundreds of these posters. And then we're having this dance in 1975, so 12 years old, and we're playing all the usual stuff. And then Bobby Davidson runs in the door halfway through the dance, wielding this copy of Kiss Alive, and all the guys dogpiled on top of him. And I still can picture him holding it out like this so it wouldn't get ruined, right? And then eventually it just turned into a Kiss Alive listening party, and all the girls slowly, one by one, shuffled out and went home, and we didn't even notice them, right? And then it's just a big sausage fest of hanging around the stereo and listening to Kiss Alive and looking at all the inserts and all that stuff. So that was pretty funny. But yeah, and then new wave of British heavy metal, who can forget flipping through the import bins in Spokane and spotting, I remember the spotting of Motorhead Overkill when it came out, already had the first one. Here they are in splashy Technicolor for the first time, and jumping up and almost hitting my head on a beam in this low beam store that they had. Seeing the Damned Music for Pleasure for the first time and just noticing that weird album cover and going, is this a new Damned album? Like, this is crazy, right? So things like that, spotting those records for the first time, being a massive Judas Priest fan and spotting Stained Class, no warning that this is out, and just flipping through the things and seeing that new logo in the corner of this weird looking disco album almost, right? And just going, my God, this is a new Judas Priest album, right? Like, wow, So those are the cool memories, the flipping and then seeing something just sitting there. It's like, what is this? We did not see this thing coming, right? So that was always fun too.
That's awesome. And that's the great thing about music. It can really take you back in time and just sort of jog these great memories. And I love in your books, you often sort of throw in little things like that. Like I think it was, you were talking about Power Age, you and your buddy riding your bikes and racing back to your house so the record wouldn't get warped, and just sort of that youthful excitement of like finding a new record, and you can't wait to get home to hear this, staring at the cover of the whole bike ride home and everything. So that's great. You've also mentioned in some of your books that you mentioned at times that you play drums, I think, right? So tell us about that. And did you have dreams of being a rock star at one point in your life?
Yeah, so took drums all through school. Even second year university, I was in a music program still. Bought a set of drums, inspired by Peter Criss, and I eventually got to meet Peter, and I had the receipt still from 1981. Showed it to him. So I was 19 when I bought that set. That was my third set or so, but my first brand new set, and it was a big 9-piece set of pearl. They were either black or white, but I think they were black, if I remember correctly. But yeah, based on him and those finely tuned toms of Rush and Max Webster, right? You had to have a big set, right? And then we had one band for one summer that actually was a professional band where we went and played the bars and we got paid and stuff. We were called Torque, and we played all these obscure covers and a few proper covers. But we would pick like popular albums and bands that had popular hits, and then we would play their non-hits kind of thing, or at least the songs off that album. Like I remember ZZ Top, Eliminator, right? We played Bad Girl and I Got the Six, right? The two heaviest songs on the album, right? So stuff like that we would do. But yeah, so we had the one band for a summer because I was always going away to university, coming back, going away, coming back. So never really had that particular huge dreams of trying to take it super seriously. I don't know why. I might seem like a natural, but just never really carried it through. Part of the problem is just hauling around drums and having a place to play drums, and you can't live in apartments and stuff with drums, right? So yeah, so that's about as far as it got.
All right. What about your writing? When did you start to show an interest in writing, and when did you realize you had a talent for it?
Not for a long time. Like I literally started, I started putting together the predecessor of that book you held up. There was an indie version called Riff Kills Man, 25 Years of Recorded Hard Rock and Heavy Metal. That was a self-published book because we had a desktop publishing print broking company. So I was well familiar with the idea of how you lay things out and get them printed and blah, blah, blah. So I started working on that book. So that came out in 93. So I would have been 30. And I started it maybe 2 years before that. So I would have been 28. So I was late already, right? Already had a BA in English and an MBA. And I look back on that book and even the one you held up, and I realized to my horror that I was a terrible writer for many years. And I didn't really feel like I could stand by what I was doing until maybe 5 years after that sort of thing. So I'm quite amazed that having a BA in English and an MBA and being 28 and 30 years old and all that already, that I was such a lousy writer. So that's why I'm kind of embarrassed by all the writing in all those old books. But whatever, it came out, and then that version that you showed there came out through a proper publisher in 97, and we did a couple other books together. My good buddy Rob Godwin they're a publisher that are just down the highway from here. They're still going. And then that got broke up into those other ones that you've got behind you there, where they got broke up by the 4 decades, right? Eventually. So yeah, that's what got the thing going.
Yeah, I think because I've heard you talk about that in your books, like sort of looking back on your early stuff and being a little bit like cringing about it, and it sort of makes me think of like with bands, bands often look back on their first album, and even though the fans love it, warts and all, a lot of times the artists will look back on it and like, oh, Iron Maiden, their first, Steve Harris doesn't like the production on the first Iron Maiden album, but the fans all love it and wouldn't want it any other way. So that's kind of, I have, such fond memories of this book that even if you were to rewrite it or something, it's you sort of, you love these things for what they are. Yeah. So you mentioned that you went to school for, you said if for English or what?
A BA in English and a master's in business. Yeah.
Okay, so when you were there, were you kind of thinking at that time that maybe you might make a career out of journalism and writing and stuff like that?
No, never crossed my mind in the least. You come from a small town in BC. You come from BC in general. You come from Canada in general. You don't even know that these things are a job, that you have any sort of connection to it all. Like, I'm never going to meet a rock star. What are you kidding? So no, it never crossed my mind, And even when I was doing that first book, it never crossed my mind. It was just like, I'm going to do this record review book, and that's the end of that. But then met Tim Henderson, because I had moved by that point to Toronto, I got transferred with Xerox. So it was my first job, but second leg of it. And he was running the heavy metal department at the flagship HMV here in Canada, in Toronto, right downtown, busiest intersection of literally the entire country. Massive heavy metal section. There's the golden age of CDs, right? 1993, 94, and he's breaking away from Drew Masters, who had Meat Magazine for about 5 years, legendary metal magazine. Drew's a great guy. We still see him all the time, but he's breaking away from Drew and starting his own magazine, Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles. It was originally called Timbits, and it was just like a little newsletter out of HMV, but then it grew, over time. And we ran that thing we started together on my photocopier, first few issues, and that thing went from May of 94 to October of 08, 108 issues, something like that. But yeah, we got that going. So by 94, 95, I was getting the first interviews I ever had with anybody. And then from there on, it was just a tsunami of record reviewing, and interviewing rock stars and writing up these stories. And I'm doing all this on the side while I have my other regular job. But eventually, the year 2000, I make that split where you see those two lines kind of bisecting. You go, if I spent 8 hours, 10 hours a day at all this rock and roll stuff, wow, wouldn't that be a cool job? And look how much stuff I could actually get done, right? So I thought, okay, make the leap. My partner, he was originally from South Africa, and him and his wife, and they just had twins, decided they're going to move to New Zealand. So we sold off our business, and I went full time at that year, 2000. And, all along the way, I was getting paid kind of a per issue rate to edit the whole magazine. And then that was all my pay. And then I was doing everything else as well. So as you went along, I'm interviewing all these guys, and then it crossed my mind that if I get 10 or 12 or 15 interviews related to one band, maybe I could do a book on them of some sort. And that's how the very first books were. I think it might have been the Blue Oyster Cult, and then the first Deep Purple, or the other way around, the Deep Purple and the first Blue Oyster Cult. And then the Rush book was pretty early. That was 2003. So yeah, that's how it got going. Just working with Tim and Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles and the great team over there, and growing that magazine.
That's awesome. What were some of the first big interviews you did where you were nervous, or you were like, wow, I can't believe I'm interviewing, this artist or this band?
Yeah, well, funny. One of my first interview was a really big one. It was Trent Reznor at the height of his fame, 1994. The second album had been out. He was like the it god of rock and roll, right? And that was for Livewire magazine, run by Mike Smith. There was a magazine out of New York, just a perfectly finished, fine, full color throughout, regular magazine that went on the shelves called Livewire, and I wrote a lot for them during that time too. That's the other thing. There were a lot of magazines around, so everybody was writing for 3, 4, 5 different places all at the same time. No internet yet, but a lot of magazines, and you're writing liner notes, bios for companies. But yeah, Trent Reznor was the first one, and my first method was I had the home stereo downstairs in the living room, and I would plug in a pair of headphones into the mic jack. And most people don't know this, but the earmuffs on your headphones are actually microphones too. And I would answer the phone downstairs, and I would quickly rubber band the thing to the headphones, and then I'd run upstairs to my office, and I'd pick up the line, and I'd do the interview there while the tape's running downstairs. And that was my method. So I was always nervous about the even those like 10, 15 seconds where you have to tell the rock star, okay, hang on a second, I'm just setting up my recording. And you do all this really fast, and you run upstairs.
I got to get the rubber band on. Hold on.
And you're like huffing and puffing and trying to start this interview. So that was the first one. Yeah, Trent Reznor. And he was a super nice guy and super polite. And I think I even told him that this is my first interview, and he was pretty darn surprised. Yeah.
Nice. So what year was it approximately when your first banned books came out? You mentioned the Blue Oyster Cult. I think it was the Agents of Fortune book, and maybe
Yeah,
the Deep Purple book. Like, what year was that approximately?
yeah. So the Blue Oyster Cult originally was called Secret Treaties,
Right. Okay.
or
Yeah.
no, it was called Secrets Revealed. That's it. The story of Blue Oyster, something like that. Secrets Revealed, or Blue Oyster Cult Secrets Revealed. That definitely was 2005, and the first Deep Purple called Getting Tighter, and they were both like really. They weren't very long, and there were no pictures, or just a few pictures in the Deep Purple one, and probably lots of typos, and which is a bane that always just annoys me to this day. There's always typos. But both of those were around that time. But yeah, I do remember the Rush was actually 2003, so that could have been the first full band biography, and that was through a proper big publisher. It was authorized, and that's been one of the best sellers over time. But that's been superseded by the trilogy thing through that same publisher, and then there were a few other Rush ones along the way that had no overlap with it. But that wasn't a long book. That was like 66,000 words, and it was full color throughout. So it was more of like a combination picture book and fairly long bio of a band, but not super long. I tend to want the bios to get to at least 80,000 words. At 80,000 words, it's a proper book.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for this interview that, in the late 90s, you had a couple of things sort of happen. You had, there was sort of this renaissance for heavy metal, right? The 90s, at least here in the States, I don't know if it was different in Canada, grunge sort of overwhelms everything. But the late 90s, I think it was around what, maybe 98, 99, Ozzy comes back to Black Sabbath. They do the live reunion record. And short time after that, you get Bruce back in Maiden. You get Rob Halford back in Priest. You start having shows on VH1 Classic, like Behind the Music, Rat, and Dawkins, and all these bands. And there's sort of this sort of interest again in the 80s metal stuff. And right around that time, like the mid to late 90s, I remember where I lived, we started getting Barnes and Nobles and Borders, which were these huge bookstores. At that time, this was a really unique thing. They were massive. They had a little coffee shop inside, chairs to sit in, and they had a massive music section, music book section. And it was maybe around in the early 2000s when, like, I think Motley Crue put out The Dirt, and you started seeing now these types of books coming out, and your books were right there. This was a real sort of like, and did you feel the same way, that it was sort of this renaissance for metal? People were interested in these sort of band histories and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. There seems to be a bit of a hockey stick graph thing for books on music in general. I think it just seemed like a lot of them started coming all at once in major waves, and it never stopped. I mean, I'm always surprised at who has a book out on them. Right? There's lots and lots and lots of books out. Yeah, and part of that probably has a little bit to do with digital technology and it being easier to make books and then print on demand. So different technologies along the way. And I remember the whole metal coming back thing was, we dealt with that entire, through all those issues of Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles. It just seemed like an ongoing debate. It was something you'd always talk to rock stars about. Oh, metal is dead. Metal is coming back. Is it coming back? Blah, blah, blah. It seemed like every interview you talked about that a little bit, right? And I remember also, to add to your examples, there was, I remember part of the narrative is the rise of Hammerfall and Primal Fear and being proud to be metal again, right? And championing it and not trying to hide behind different clothes or trying to be a grungy version of a hair metal band and all those kinds of things, right? So there was all that proud to be metal sort of thing again that was coming up. But yeah, your examples also feed into that. But it's funny, and in a way, I mean, if metal came back, it was only gradual. It was a gradual thing. Because the other narrative is it never went away. So how could it come back? That was something we'd always say all the time too. So I'd say books went like this, and metal coming back just kind of went like that. It got somewhat better all the time, but it never like blew up or whatever. But you know, you did have that golden period of massive CD sales for various things. And Johnny on the Spot was new metal. Like, remember,
Yeah.
new metal bands were going multi-platinum all over the place, or effortlessly platinum. And that happened with hair metal as well, right? You know, hair metal seemed like you could sell a lot of records pretty effortlessly. New metal, like, was that almost on like a double scale. So if you call all these different new metal bands metal, I mean, that's where a lot of the sales got hoovered up, right? There was some huge sellers during that sort of 2000 to 2005 period.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It was a real interesting time. You know, you had new metal going on, you had this resurgence of traditional metal, and then from the book side of it, you were starting to see all these really, like, your books were showing up, and all these great sort of people were interested in this going back now, and sort of heavy metal had aged enough, I guess, that it was in a position to be studied and analyzed and looked back on, and charts and
Yeah.
graphs and countdowns and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
all right, well then, illegal downloading and streaming have totally changed the game for bands and labels. Did the advent of electronic books have the same effect on you in the book industry? And kind of how did you adjust to sort of that changing landscape?
No, absolutely not. It's barely an issue, or it's barely a topic, because ebooks are probably a fraction even still of print books. It you know, we don't even know, but there are, you know, I think it's one of the industry's dirty secrets that maybe ebooks kind of they definitely get pirated. There's a lot of just flat out pirating going on, so there is a little bit of that. But you know, number one, book sales are way smaller than record sales anyways. Ebooks are a different thing. Ebooks are not as easy and amazing and as similar as electronic files are to physical. In that field, it just wasn't as easy. It's just not as big as a news story. In terms of how have ebooks done, ebooks started as a very small trickle of anybody's you know, book sales, quote unquote, and then it kind of picked up as it got some traction, and then it's now been a fairly stable part. It hasn't blown up, it hasn't died. Technology hasn't really changed on ebooks since the beginning, really. It's kind
Yeah.
of the same technology. You know, so I guess one of the funny things, or one of the differences now, come to think about it, the whole idea of downloading files and sticking them on your computer was a brief period, really. There was the war over it being free, and then there was still, it persisted in being free, and then there was the very brief period when people would pay for downloads and buy downloads. But that whole period of technology didn't last very long, and now we're into streaming. So that kind of thing never happened with ebooks. There's not, for example, there's no large subscription service really
Right.
of
Like
ebooks. I think you could do this kind of thing for magazines, where you can pay $10 a month and have access to a few hundred magazines, right? Um, but that's never really happened in books, and that's exactly what Spotify is in music, right? And these other places. Pay your $10 and you got access to millions and millions of records, right? So I don't know. I mean, ebooks right now for me is so small a part of any income or sales that it's almost inconsequential. It's a nice thing to have, you know, couple few $100 a month or whatever from the various places, but it doesn't really amount to much, and it never really took off the way everybody thought it would take off. Everybody
Yeah.
thought you'd only be reading
Yeah.
electronically and it'd be the death of physical books, and that kind of never happened yet.
Right. And I think metal fans, it's the same thing with music. Everybody thought when illegal downloading hit, and now they say the same thing with streaming, that, and yeah, physical media sales are certainly down, but metalheads especially, they love to collect things. They love to have their records lined up in an alphabetical order. They love to have their bookshelves with their
Yeah.
books all lined up and everything. So I don't think it will ever completely go away. And you know, with the way technology is now, you're with the internet and the way things are now, you're able to do what you do with your website, where you're able to, fans can order things directly from you from your website. I'm on your email list. I get alerted whenever you stumble across a box of a few extra books that you thought were out of print and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So there's
Yeah.
this way that you can be connected with your audience now and the people that
Yeah.
want your stuff. That's really incredible.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, you're also an artist. So was that always one of your passions? Also, tell us some about
Yeah,
your artwork.
definitely. I mean, that's what I'd like to do more than anything. You know, I painted in the 90s, and you could see some of that stuff on the website, and almost everything sold. And I got in a few little gallery things. It seemed pretty effortless. I priced stuff pretty high to start with, and things sold, and I just quit doing it. And it just got too messy and big and bulky because the materials I was using was kind of, you know, not exactly pioneering, but I was mixing a lot of things that shouldn't be mixed, like a lot of acrylic mixed with oil, mixed with this evil pink liquid called Liquin that was really expensive. And so and you had to have really good ventilation because it was really bad for you. So I did all that, and then I kind of stopped. I suppose I got busy, and I did a lot more writing, I suppose. But in recent years, I started doing the easy stuff, which is a lot of drawing, and I did some pencil crayon things where I'm imagining different record ads and blah blah blah, and I throw those up on my Facebook page. But I did a thing finally, knocked off kind of a goal that I wanted. So I did that Flaming Telepaths book, which is Flaming Telepaths Imaginos Expanded and Specified, where it's this crazy timeline that mixes fact and fiction together and brings in all the different elements of the whole Bluish called Imagino story. But for that, I also did 39 pencil illustrations, and we had those put in the book and kind of like gussied up a little bit with borders and things like that aren't on the original pencil illustrations. And so those are throughout the book. And then in the back, I've got an offer where I am offering, and I'm selling a few, which is nice, prints of these. And then you get a mystery print for the first like $30. You buy a print, you get also a mystery print, and you get the image key, which tells you what all the pictures mean, like all the weird little things in each picture. And then every additional print's like $20, right? So I started doing that, and I signed them and number them. They're all going to be numbered 1 to 72. So that is something I really want to do. I want to do way more artwork. That's all I want to do, really. I read art books all the time. I watch art documentaries all the time. I watch YouTube videos on how to get a print business going and all this kind of stuff. So I would gladly chuck all the writing to do art for whatever my final years are.
Wow, awesome. That's awesome. And of course, if you go to your website, which we'll leave links down below, you can see some of your artwork on your website. Yeah. All right. Well, as we wrap it up here, so tell me, is there any artist, living or deceased, that you wish you could have interviewed or that you still want to interview that you haven't?
Definitely. There's a small list of those. The farthest up the food chain I ever got was as far up as you could possibly get, and that was Paul McCartney. So I did get to interview Paul McCartney, talk to him for my Queen book, Queen album by album. So mostly we just talked about Queen, which was kind of cool. But remaining on my list of guys I would want to talk to the most would be the likes of Roger Waters, Jimmy Page. Robert Plant, I did get in on. I was in part of a conference call, so I did get to ask him one question. So I've technically interviewed Robert Plant. Brian May would be way up that list. Pete Townsend would be up that list. That's a good short list right there. Those would be the guys.
Yeah, nice. All right. Well, tell everybody out there, what do you got going on now? What do you got? What are your plans? Got anything fun for going on for the future?
Well, let's see. So the next thing to arrive that's finished would be the next in the series. This would be the 5th or 6th or 4th, or I don't know, 5th or 6th of these coffee table books we've been doing through Weimer Publishing. So they're like a visual history, which is a long timeline with full color throughout, big hardcover coffee table books. We got one on Uriah Heep coming down the pipes.
Nice.
That's finished. There's a Yes one that's being laid out now. I've seen close to final proofs on that. We've got a Nazareth one coming in that. A few other things. Can I talk about either of these? Let's see. I got 3 different ones. No, three through 3 different publishing situations that I probably shouldn't talk about. The latest ones are the Angel books. So I've got the Angel book still. I've got the Sweet book still, Rebel Rouser. Here's the Flaming Telepaths that we just talked about. And this is the one that I'm doing a lot of packing up, the Rush trilogy, so Driven. So those are the 4 latest ones. Yeah, that's about it, and it's all available at martinpopoff.com.
Awesome. Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time and joining me here at the Lair. I really appreciate it. I know how busy you are and how many things you have going on. So
yeah, that was fun, man. Thanks very much, John. Very
all
cool.
right, you're welcome. All right, so everybody, check out the descriptions down below for Martin's website, where you can get his books, get more information on Martin. I'll also leave links to Martin's YouTube channel, which we really didn't get into, but I'll tell you, it's fun. Trust me, it's great. The Contrarians and some of the other different things that Martin is involved in. I'll leave links down below. So thank you again, Martin. Leave some comments down in the description here. I know people out there that subscribe to my channel. I know there's a lot of Martin Popoff fans out there. So let me know what you thought of the interview. Let me know some of your favorite Martin Popoff books, and make sure you hit like and subscribe. And until we see you again, remember to stay heavy, stay metal.